Hello students, my name is Gandharva Hemant Pednekar, Research Associate, School of Development Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. I will be discussing about the module on historical and recent trends of international migration. The learning objectives of this module are historical and recent trends of international migration, the pattern and trends of international migration in Asia, immigrants countries in Asia, immigrants countries in Asia, and history of immigration from India. The modern history of international migration can be divided roughly into four periods. During the mercantile period from 1500 to 1800, world immigration flows were dominated by Europe and stemmed from process of colonization and economic growth under mercantile capitalism. Over the course of 300 years, Europeans inhabited large portion of the Americas, Africa, Asia and Oceania. Although the exact number of colonizing immigrants is unknown, the outflow was sufficient to establish Europe's domination over large parts of the world. During this period, immigrants generally fell into three classes: a relatively large number of agrarian settlers, a smaller number of administrators and artisans, and an even smaller number of entrepreneurs who founded plantations to produce raw materials for Europe's growing mercantile economics. Although the number of Europeans involved in plantation production was small, this sector had a profound impact on the size and composition of population in the Americas. Given a pre-industrial technology, plantations required large amount of cheap labor, a demand met partially by indentured workers from East Asia. The most important source of labor, however, came from the forced migration of African slaves. Over 3 centuries, nearly 10 million Africans were imported into the Americas, and together with European colonists, they radically transformed its social and demographic composition. The second period of immigration, the industrial period, began early in the 19th century and stemmed from the economic development of Europe and spread of industrialism to former colonies in the New World. From 1800 to 1925, more than 48 million people left the industrializing countries of Europe in search of new lives in the Americas and Oceania. Of these immigrants, 85% went to just 5 destinations: Argentina, Australia, Canada, New Zealand and the United States. The last one alone receiving 60%. Key sending nations were Britain, Italy, Norway, Portugal, Spain and Sweden, which all exported a large share of their potential population in the course of industrializing. Although international migrants were not exclusively European, the overwhelming majority came from that continent. Of all US immigrants between 1820 and 1920, for example, 88% were from Europe, 3 were from Asia and 8% came from the Americas. The period of large-scale European faltered with the outbreak of World War I, which brought European immigration to an abrupt halt and ushered in a 4-decade period of limited migration. Although immigration received somewhat during the early 1920s, by the several important receiving countries had passed restrictive immigration laws. The onset of Great Depression stopped virtually all international movement in 1920, and except for a small amount of return migration, there was little movement during the 1930s. During the 1940s, international migration was checked by Second World War. What mobility there was consisted largely of the movements of the refugees and displaced persons, and was not tied strongly to the rhythms of economic growth and development. This pattern persisted well into the subsequent decade. The period of post-industrial migration emerged during the 1960s and continued a sharp break with the past. Rather than being dominated by outflows from Europe to a handful of former colonies, immigration became a truly global phenomena as the number of and variety of both sending and receiving countries increased, and the global supply of immigrants shifted from Europe to the developing world. Whereas migration during the industrial era brought people from densely settled, rapidly industrializing areas into sparsely settled, rapidly industrializing nations. Migration in the post-industrial era brought people from densely settled countries at the earliest stages of industrialization into densely settled, economically mature post-industrial societies. Before 1925, 85% of all international migrants originated in Europe, but since 1960, Europe has contributed an increasingly small fraction of immigrants to world migration flows, as immigrants from Africa, Asia and Latin America has increased dramatically. The number and variety of destination countries have likewise grown. In addition to traditional immigrant receiving nations such as Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand and Argentina countries throughout, Western Europe now attracts significant number of immigrants, notably Germany, France, Belgium, Switzerland, Sweden and the Netherlands. During the late 1970s, even long-time sending countries such as Italy, Spain and Portugal began receiving immigrants from the Middle East and Africa. And after the rapid escalation of oil prices in 1973, several less developed but capital-rich nations in the Gulf region also began to sponsor massive labor migration. By the 1980s, international migration had spread into Asia, not just to Japan but also to newly industrialized countries such as Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia and Thailand. By 1990s, therefore, international migration had become truly a global phenomena, and reflecting this new silence, social scientists from a variety of disciplines sought to formulate new theories of migration to supplement those developed during the earlier industrial era. The pattern and trends of international migration area. This section tries to explore the pattern and trends of international migration in Asia and its regions and explore the major immigrants corridor in Asian countries. When the 20th century came to close, Asia has become one of the most significant and globalized region in the world, not only in terms of cross-border movement of capital goods, but in terms of movement of people. It accounts for some 28% of the world's international migrants. As per the United Nations, globally there were 232 million international migrants in 2013. In Asia, international migration is high as compared to other countries. In Asia, total international migrant stocks is 49.9 million in 1990, and these increased to 70.8 million in 2013. The last decade has seen an increase not only in the number of Asians moving between nations, but the type of mobility have become more complex and the movement has become less selective. The forces which are responsible for this increase in movement are associated with globalization, increased level of education, proliferation of international media, improved transport system, and the internationalization of business and labor markets. In Asia, there are two elements which have been especially influential. The first is the proliferation of social networks. Most Asian international migrants move to a place where they have social capital in the form of relatives or friends already living there. These networks not only encourage and facilitate mobility but also assist the migrant in adjusting to the situation in the destination. The growing number of Asians living outside their country of birth comprise anchors in a rapidly spreading network of connections facilitating migration. The second facilitator is the vast migration industry comprising migration agents, recruiters, travel providers, immigration officials, etc., who form chain linking Asian communities with overseas destinations and are crucial elements in the migration system. In the last decade, there has been an exponential increase in the movement of Asians out of the region, but also between Asian countries, and there has been an increased movement of people into the Asian region from outside the region. Asia is the second most important host region for the international migrants, next only to Europe. Asia is the Earth's largest and most populous continent, located primarily in the eastern and northern hemispheres. There are 5 regions in Asia, that is Central Asia, Eastern Asia, Southeastern Asia, Southern Asia, and Western Asia. Immigrant countries in Asia. Asia comprises more than 50% of world's population and more than 60% of world population's migrants. Asia is the only country to send more migrants in all over the world. In 1990, Asia accounted for the largest number of international migrants, involving 49.8 million. Asia ranked second after the Europe for sending the migrants in all over the world. Migrant workers mainly came from Bangladesh, Burma, Cambodia, China, India, Indonesia, Nepal, Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam. Most of the migrants came from employments where employments known as 3Ds: dirty, dangerous, and difficult. Most of the women came from Philippines for the work of nurses, and their number is increasing day by day. The Philippines are very great exporters of labor. Philippines mainly go to Gulf countries where they tend to construction work. The geographical and cultural proximity also encourages choosing the destination place. Immigrants countries in Asia. Asian population mainly goes to Middle East countries, especially Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Filipinos, Sri Lankans and Indonesians went to this country because of the livelihood opportunity. In recent decade, Thailand and Malaysia both the large number of immigrants and immigrants because their economy was strong, so most of the people immigrated in this country. In Asia, the important feature of migration is its interregional nature, which characterizes Asia's migration flows. The important characteristics of Asia migration flow. Asia comprises 4 sub-regions: Central Asia, Eastern Asia, Southern Asia, Southeastern Asia and Western Asia. In Central Asia, Russia Federation is main hub for migration in Soviet post. But after the disrupt of Russia, Kazakhstan is the central point of migration. In Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan are sending country and Kazakhstan is the main receiving country. In Western Asia, generally known as the Gulf countries, are Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and United Arab Emirates are the main destination host countries for the Southern Asia and Philippines. In Southern Asia, migration process is very important and different in nature, especially the country whom sharing the common borders. The migration process in Southern Asia mainly started in 1970 when oil boom started in Middle East countries. In Southern Asia, India and Pakistan also serve the main destination market for migrant workers from Nepal, Bangladesh and Myanmar. According to United Nations 2013, in 1990, the total international refugee amount is 19.9% and this was decreased in 2013 in 14.6%. In Asian regions, the total international refugee migration is high in Southern and Western Asia. According to Hugo 2004, because of political conflicts, climate change and for employment, most of the people are forcefully migrated to other regions, and this type of migration which is cross the international boundaries called refugee migration and asylum seekers. Refugee is the common problem in the region and there is no possible solution to come out of this situation. Asia is the largest refugee country and they host the 41% of the refugee population in the world. In Asian region, Southern Asia hosted the largest amount of refugee population and India is one of them. Most of the refugee flow in this region because of human cause and natural disasters. Migration has both direct and indirect effects on demography of the population at origin and destination. The direct effect became visible immediately and is mostly structural in nature. The indirect consequence work through behavioral changes on fertility, mortality and other demographic parameters. Migration flow towards economic opportunities the last 2 decades has witnessed in social and economic change in Asia because of the mobility of the populations. In Asia, there are various types of migration, include short-term migration, long-term migration, skilled migration, semi-skilled migration, low-skilled migration, etc. Asia has exhibited the highest growth as a host region for migrants in the 2005 to 2010 period, with an annual average growth rate of 2.1% in the stock of migrants hosted by region during the period. Asia comprises 60% of the total population and more than 50% are migrants. Migration has become important social phenomena in Asia and does not change in future. The main question is why people migrate. There are mainly two factors. One is the push factors, second is the pull factors. The various sub-regions in Asia characterized by different migratory movement. Southern Asia is the main sub-region of origin and Southeast Asia is the region characterized by both origin and destination place. In Western Asia, more people migrate because there are more chance to have employment in construction, industry work, labor, painting, agriculture, etc. In Central Asia, most of the part was Russian Empire. In this region, Kazakhstan and Russia was the main standpoint of migration. 40% of the total migration related population growth in Russia when it came to permanent migration. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia Federation was disrupted to Central Asia. The newly industrialized countries of East and Southeast Asia have also emerged as important destination of migrant peoples. Rapid growth of economic in East and Southeast Asia has shifted the pattern of international migration. The 19th century marked by great waves of migration in Asia. Both 1990s and 2013, the number of international migration in Asia rose by 49.9% to 70.8%. In 1990, Kazakhstan and Russia was the main standpoint of migration. Kazakhstan and Russia both are the source and recipients of origin and destination, but after the disrupt of Russian Federation, Kazakhstan was the main center point of the migration. In 1990, Afghanistan, India and Bangladesh are the main immigrant countries, and for the India and Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia was the main destination country. In 1990 to 2000 and 2000 to 2013, net immigration changed in Asian countries, that called the status change in Asia. In 2000, top net immigration countries are Saudi Arabia, Iran and China. Hong Kong, and top net immigration countries are Bangladesh, Afghanistan and China. We are losing the net international migration. In 2000, India is both the recipient of origin and destination for both immigration, and immigration rate were high in India. In India, people are immigrating to Saudi Arabia. In 2010, the trend of migration changed in Asia and the top net migration countries are Saudi Arabia followed by United Arab Emirates, China, Hong Kong and Iran. In Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, the migration proportion was high in low skilled labor that generally moves for temporary employment. Higher percentage of international migration in smaller countries because their economic situation is strong and their migrant friendly policy. Example, China, Hong Kong, Singapore and Iran, where immigration rate is high. In 2010, the top net losing countries where the lack of opportunity in the country of origin is high are Bangladesh, followed by Afghanistan and India. So most of the people migrate to destination countries where the employment opportunities is high. In 2013, the top receiving country is Saudi Arabia, followed by United Arab Emirates and Thailand. In Thailand, immigration rate is high because of the strongest economy in the world, excluding Malaysia. The economic growth rate is high, so most of the people immigrate in Thailand. In addition, the top net losing countries are Bangladesh, followed by India and Afghanistan. If we see the history of immigration from India, we can say that international labor mobility is a mean to secure a better life for the migrants and their families. The remittances, skill and knowledge transfers, investments and international business activity that migration generates contribute significantly to economic, political and social advances in countries both of origin and of destination, as per ILO 2010. Globally, it is estimated that around 214 million people were international migrants, constituting about 3% of the world's population. The share of international migrants in the world's population has remained remarkably stable at around 3% over the past 50 years, despite factors that could have been expected to increase flows. It is also estimated that overseas Indians comprise about 25 millions, that is 2% of India's population, spread across 189 countries. India has the world's second largest overseas community next only to China, but far more diverse. It is assessed that a significant proportion of this is contributed by the increasing number of unskilled and semi-skilled Indian workers employed in the Gulf countries and Malaysia, as per Annual Report 2009-2010 MOIA. The Government of India has thus created a new ministry known as Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs in 2004. The immigration of Indian people has a long history. A huge migration of Indian labour took place during the colonial period to the countries like South Africa, Mauritius, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana and Fiji in response to the enormous demand for cheap labour that arose immediately after the British abolished slavery in 1833 to 1834. Indentured system of labour, which was a system in between slavery and free labour, was invented and the Indian labourers were shipped to the colonies of Africa, South America and the Caribbean. The movement of Indian immigrants to Europe, North America and Australia is largely a phenomena of the 20th century. There are three main categories of people who migrated. First were those with agricultural backgrounds. Second were the entrepreneurs, store owners, motel owners and self-employed small businessmen who had migrated since 1965 onwards. And the third were professionals like doctors, engineers, 1960s onwards, software engineer, management consultant, financial experts, media people 1980s onwards and others as per Sharma 2002. There was also a steady outflow of migration to the Gulf in the 1970s in the wake of oil boom. But the nature of immigration to Gulf countries is different from migration to other developed countries, as majority of the migrant to Gulf countries are either unskilled or semi-skilled and go as contract workers and return home on completion of the contract. Thank you.